We're going to take a trip. I know you're well traveled, but just follow me. If you ever get lost, let's go back to the first bullet point and work your way down. In order to take this trip, we have to go through a few steps. All right, so just prepare yourself. Here we go. I want you to pick a number between 1 and 5. Good. Next, I want you to multiply your number by 9. Good. Next, if your new number is 2 digits, add them together. If it's 1, just use that number. Then, I want you to subtract 3. Then, I want you to convert that number to a letter. So in this case, 1 equals A, 2 equals B, 3 equals C, 4 equals D, 5 equals E, and so on. Got it? Next, I want you to think of a U.S. state that begins with that letter. Next, I want you to take the last letter of that state and think of an animal that begins with that letter. And last, using the last letter of the animal you just chose, think of a color that begins with that letter. Now, I know you all are well-read, well-traveled, critical thinking, wonderful people. All that being said, although there are many of them, you're unlikely to find a red alligator in Florida. Oh, how many of you are thinking red alligator in Florida? Yes, it's magic, son. You gotta know as a magician and a scientist at the same time. It's very impressive. That's why they bring me in. I understand. All right, so how did I read your mind? I get to that in a second. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm Reverend Dr. Bryant T. Marks, Sr., Founder, Chief Equity Officer at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity. Also a tenured professor of psychology at Morehouse College. At Entire, as we call it, we provide in-person and virtual trainings on a variety of topics, including implicit bias awareness and mitigation, recruiting, retaining a diverse workforce, and many other topics that will be related to what many call the broad category of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Trained over 100,000 attendees in the last few years, over 500 partners we credit ourselves with assisting, including many police officers, city, county, federal government, corporations, all sorts of partners. Is wonderful. It's great. So if you've been in one of our trainings, welcome. I'm glad I can provide you with some additional content. For those that are new, welcome as well. Hopefully you'll find something that you can leverage. The content I give you here, very similar to what we present in our trainings that we conduct across the country. All right. So I have my beats in the background. I'm a hipologist, a retired rapper. So this puts me in the right headspace in order to deliver for you at the highest level possible. All right, folks. So how did I read your mind? Let's go for it. Okay. So I asked you to pick a number between 1 and 5. You did that? No problem. Then I said, multiply your number by 9. You did that? No problem. But then I said, if your new number is 2 digits, add them together. If it's 1, just use that number. It will always equal 9. So each of you with basic math skills should have been at 9. So now the next 2 steps became easy. Subtract 3, it'll always equal 6, okay? And convert your number to a letter, it will always equal F, all right? So your letter was F. Now, the next step was easy as well. Why is that? I asked you to think of a U.S. state that begins with that letter. Actually, Florida is the only state in the U.S. that begins with the letter F. Very interesting. Next step, I said take the last letter of the state and think of an animal that begins with that letter. Last name of Florida is A. Now, this is where your biases kick in, right? Meaning you have an alligator bias. Think about it. Besides alligator, what are some other animals beginning with A, right? Ants, aardvark, right? That sort of thing. Alpaca. Okay, but alligator came to mind. Now, also, I anchored you with a sort of recency bias in that I gave you Florida, and Florida has a lot of alligators, so it made it even more likely that you would say alligator. Okay, but again, you thought you were thinking independently, not so much. Then I said, using the last letter of the animal you just chose, think of a color that begins with that letter. Last name of alligator is R. Color you gave? Red. Now, you could have said ruby, raspberry, you could have said rose, whatever it is, but red comes to mind, right? Why is that? Red may not be your favorite color, but in our society, because what are the 2 ingredients to having implicit bias? Living in a society, having a brain, that's how red came to mind. Now, this notion of associating one thing with another, pretty much directly related to overexposure. In our previous trainings, we talk about that. But we've all been overexposed when it comes to colors, to red versus rose, to alligator regulated versus aardvark. Florida kind of locked you in, but there's many other ways, many other times we think we're thinking independently, not so much. Right, our thinking can be controlled by the situation. Okay, so we like going through these sort of riddles. You know how we start off, but it's all related to our different biases, the way our brain works, related to DEI as well. So let's go ahead and jump into our title for today: Defending DEI. I'm going to give you the #1 strategy to beat the backlash towards diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, this is by popular demand. A lot of our clients and partners, how do we keep doing DEI work? Given the backlash and the pushback politically and otherwise, I did a training previously. Look at our videos on what is DEI and why everyone needs DEI training. I'm going to go a little deeper here with a specific strategy. Now, these apply mostly to organizations, but this particular strategy, but also can apply to individuals as well. All right. So that's where we are as we jump in, looking at the backlash. And folks, it's getting deep out there. All right. Here we go. Let's get it. Okay. Now, defending DEI, and some of you feel you're in a position where you have to defend it, okay? I get it. It's sort of a new day. We had George Floyd, and interest in DEI skyrocketed, and that was great in a certain way. The interest is there. Now the interest has died down, budgets being cut, chief diversity officers being let go, equity teams being disbanded, that sort of thing. But for those who are committed, and some of you are, I'm going to give you some assistance here. I do want to provide a word on DEI and anti-bias training versus doing the work. People say, oh, DEI is dead. Celebrities, famous people you know, DEI is dead. DEI training doesn't work. All these other things. Okay, folks, this is absolutely ridiculous on its face. I've defined diversity, equity, inclusion. Diversity means difference. Equity is customized distribution of resources or support given somebody's situation or condition. Inclusion, a sense of feeling welcome, supported, or valued in a particular space, particularly the workplace. On its face, we understand these are reasonable concepts to consider. DEI is not unqualified people receiving opportunities. And that's what it's been reduced to in some minds, okay? Also, separate DEI training from DEI bias mitigation or execution. What do I mean? You can sit through a DEI training, 1 hour, 2 hour video, live, whatever the case is. You get information. If that information that you receive, if there's somebody who knows what they're doing in terms of the person who's training, if they provide you concrete strategies at the individual organizational levels with some guidance on how to execute those strategies, then that organization goes out and executes those strategies, they should see a difference. The training in and of itself is not sufficient, I agree. But if the training includes strategies that need to be executed and they aren't executed, then the training, quote unquote, didn't work. That's not the purpose of training. Purpose of DEI training is to inform, to provide information. Afterwards, there needs to be some execution, right? So there's an over expectation, like it's magic, on just the training itself. It does change knowledge and information, not necessarily behavior. So please separate the training from the execution of the recommendations in the training. Okay. All right. So again, I feel a little passionate about this because it's the personal trainer analogy. I go to personal trainer, right? The personal trainer tells you how I should eat, what I should drink, the exercise regimen, all that sort of thing. I go home and do nothing. Am I going to conclude that personal training doesn't work? No. The training works if you do the work. That's how this goes. So anytime somebody pushes back against DEI, the concepts, information-wise, that's ridiculous. You can define it. You know the definition. If somebody says the training doesn't work, your question is, well, did we execute what was recommended in the training over time with fidelity, with quality control? Then we have a conversation. Hopefully that's helpful for you. All right. So now we're going to get to our #1 strategy to beat the backlash against diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, this is a strategy I live by. I train on it all the time. I'm a professor. I teach courses on this all the time. I'm a research scientist. I had a lab, I have students, and we execute on this all the time. You know what it is? You know what it is? It's almost a mantra. You might have heard something like it in a movie some time ago. You know what it is? You know what it is? This is how you destroy people pushing back on DEI. Just ask them, just show me the data. Show me the data, man. I'm trying to tell you. This is going to give you cover. It seems simple to say, oh, show me the data. There's much more to it than that. This will destroy any argument against DEI. Let's get it. So, defending diversity, equity, inclusion, and reducing bias. Assessment. Show me the data. You want to make identifying potential disparities a standard practice in your organizations. If it is a standard practice, this is going to help you. Why is that? There are basically a few different ways that bias can play out in the workplace, right? Now, a strategy you can implement is just analyze existing data to identify systemic implicit bias in your organization. You already have data that exists. Go to HR. Where do we recruit? What is our yield? What is our retention? There's all sorts of data you already have, okay? Mine your existing data. You are going to find patterns in terms of who stays and who goes, pace to promotion, all types of things in your existing data. Okay. Now, if you can collect new data, that's great. But in your existing data, there's probably a lot that's already there. So the way to think about bias when it comes to organizations, there are two main ways that bias plays out. One is internal, right? That's within the organization. That's all your HR stuff, hiring, promotion, performance evaluation, assignment delegation. I did a video previously on recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce. In other words, the 7 mistakes that HR managers make in recruiting and retaining a diverse workforce. So check that out when you get a chance. But within the organization, so what does that look like? Folks, if you're an HR person, if you're a manager, CEO, y'all please pay attention. Diversity, the lack of representation at all levels relative to demographics of the qualified pool, local population, and industry. Let's unpack that. See, I deal with organizations. Oh, we're so diverse, right? Oh, we got 10% this and 15% that. I'm saying, okay, yeah, I saw your diversity. I walked to your building today, and I saw some of your diversity in terms of, black and brown folks. It was like entry level, front lines, security guard, cashier, copy room, mail room, that sort of thing. Then I go up to middle management, some diversity there, racial, ethnically. Then I go to the senior level, not so much. Folks, don't. Some people think they slick. Don't just count bodies in a building, right? Look at roles and ranks. If you say we're diverse, we have all these percentages, at every role and every rank do you have similar levels of diversity? Or does diversity show up in certain pockets of places and not others? Okay? So if you have true diversity, look at your data, your roles and rank. Now, you have to be reasonable relative to the demographics of the qualified pool. For example, if you look in your accounting department in terms of CPAs, I don't know this for a fact, I'm making this number up, but say in the US, 70% of CPAs are men, 30% are women. In your accounting department, you have 70-30 as well. You're on par, that is parity, right? Now, 50-50 would be great, but we understand if you're 70-30. But if you're 90-10, that's an issue. So we can be reasonable in our expectations given the qualified pool, all right? Local population. So when you have entry-level positions, we want those entry-level positions in particular, we can understand how they might reflect the local population, right? We don't do national searches for cashiers and security guards and copy room and mail room. So we don't always do that. But when we're in certain environments, we may recruit locally, and if the local population or the local population looks like our workforce, that's great. Okay. Now, I don't say that to say you can also recruit mid and senior people from your local population. I'm not trying to limit local population to frontline and entry-level positions, okay? But the notion is, can you take the local population into account or the industry? Some industries just lean one way or another in terms of race or gender or ethnicity, whatever the case is, we understand that. Again, within reason. Next, equity. Consideration of circumstances beyond one's control. So do you know for a fact, folks, let me just back up. Let me just make this as plain as I can, okay? With this data stuff. This is how you phrase it. Everybody listen. If somebody pushes back, DEI, implicit bias training, whatever, this is what you ask them, right? Do you know for a fact, with data, that there's no racial, gender, ethnic, religious, or relationship bias in our organization? That's how you phrase it. Do you know for a fact, with data, that these disparities do not exist? Because with the over 500 companies and partners that we've trained, those who have looked for bias in those systemic ways, race, gender, age, religion, and relationships, the cliques, the in-group sort of thing, they tend to find it. We have yet to come across an organization that examined their culture and did not find bias at some level in one of those areas. Now, if you're an organization and you scientifically look at those outcomes or those demographics, those areas, and find no bias, send us your report. I'll send my team up to study you for a year for free. That means you cracked the code. You found the holy grail. You got a big organization and no bias, race, gender, age, religion, or relationship bias. That's wonderful. Outstanding. I'll get you $1 million in grants, by the way, if that's the case. Because if you solve bias, that's worth scaling. Okay. So again, folks, I'm a little passionate, but hopefully y'all get what I'm saying. So equity, consideration of circumstances beyond one's control. For example, commuting via public versus private transportation. We don't even think about transportation. What do I mean? if I got to drive to work every day, right? I own a car and I'm driving to work and there's traffic, I could go on Waze or the GPS and find a new way to work. If I'm on a bus, on a train, they're not taking alternative routes. They're just staying in traffic or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So the notion is you may not see that as an equity issue, but these are circumstances beyond one's control. If I cannot afford a car, I'm sort of at the mercy of traffic and in ways that are beyond my control, no alternatives. All right, nursing mother. Now this is easy, and I talked about this before a little bit. So actually watch the other video. I talk about the nursing mother example. I talk about the wheelchair example. But the notion is, do you know for a fact with data that your organization is equitable? Meaning, if you have subgroups of your population, do they have what they particularly need to be successful? Are you baiting the hook to suit the fish? Are you adjusting as needed? Next, equality, hiring, promotion, pay, assignments, assuming equal qualifications. You already have this data. It already exists in your organizations, right? So if people are pushing back, here's what you can say. Do you know for a fact with data that men and women who start with the same qualifications, right? Same background, same education, are they paid the same, promoted the same, advanced the same? That's the question, okay? Service and support of coworkers. You could have lateral bias within a team. What do I mean? Say I'm on a team, or actually, I'll put it this way. You can have bottom-up bias. So I come to work, I feel unappreciated. I don't feel welcome. I don't feel respected by my colleagues or my boss. I'm just going to work to get a check and get my benefits. Then, one of my colleagues, who I'm friendly with, asked me to help them out with a project. I help them. Another person on my team, right, asked me to help them out. I don't help them. That's still bias. It's lateral, person to person. My boss wants me to stay late. I'm not staying late. I don't feel respected or included. Now you see me when you want something? Nah, I'm good. Do you understand? So this can happen in a variety of ways. Or I give you one better. Say you have a diversity push. Say your boss is a different race, gender, age, especially age. They're younger than you, right? But you feel somehow they're undeserving of their position, or you resent them being in their position. You get a bottom-up bias. You're not going to believe what I'm about to say. You are not going to believe it. But do you know, in the United States of America, that some people work harder for some bosses than others? No. Yes. So if I don't feel you're deserving your position, I'm not working hard for you, right? So the notion is this can play in all sorts of ways. So I'm asking you for the data, because we're saying DEI training is unnecessary. We don't need it. Okay, show me the data existing that you already have that says none of this is going on. And finally, inclusion, feeling welcome, respected, supported, and valued. Do you know for a fact with data, that all of your people feel equally welcome, respected, valued, and supported? Why is that important? Because if I don't feel these things, do you think I'm working hard for you? You think that doesn't translate to how I treat the public, our clients, our customers? If my boss has disrespected me, now I got to go to the front line, to this counter, through this glass, get on this phone, and serve the public. I got an attitude. I'm going to do all this. I'm giving my best when it's not going to be recognized anyway. Trickle-down effect. So I'm asking you right now, do you know for a fact with data, you have diversity, every role and rank. You have equity, you're providing the different subgroups in your organization what they need to be successful. Equality, assuming equal qualifications, similar outcomes, and inclusion, the feeling welcome, respected, valued, and supported with data. I'm telling you folks, all these people pushing back on DEI do not have this data. Because if they did, they would see they have some disparities. Next, so that's internal. Now let's talk external. Okay? Potential bias in service delivery and impact on customers of the public. The disparities in customer client outcomes by demographic. So it's one thing to have an annual employee survey internally. You know, how you feeling? Do you like working here? You thought about leaving? The internal stuff, very, very important. We love that annual in-house sort of data. That's great. You also want to collect data from your external stakeholders, your clients, your customers, the public, to confirm that you are treating all of them equally well, that there's no bias in how you're treating them. Let me ask you this. Do you know for a fact, with data, that your unit, your department, your organization, or even you are serving your clients, customers, or public equally? That if somebody calls your office from a certain part of the country, certain part of the state, certain part of the city, or from a certain organization or company, or has a certain accent, do you know for a fact with data that you're treating all of them equally well? Someone calls in a customer service, has an accent from one country versus another, there's no difference in the response at any level. Somebody calls in, they're splitting verbs, don't speak English that well. No bias, no difference in the response. That's what we're talking about, okay? Can you produce the data that shows you are consistent with excellence in how you serve your customers, clients, and the public? Next, some details, some examples in terms of sectors. Healthcare, my doctors, nurses, physicians, tech people. So we work deeply in healthcare. You know for a fact, with data, there's no bias or difference in terms of diagnosis, treatment plans, and outcomes for patients. I can show you 50 studies that show there's bias in healthcare. We already know this. There's equity issues in healthcare. Okay. Next, again, you know for a fact, with data in terms of criminal justice, there's no difference in terms of the citizens who complain about law enforcement, how they're treated, that sort of thing. Right? You know for a fact, with data, that people, depending on their race, gender, age, aren't stopped at a different rate, arrested at a different rate, the bails aren't set at different rates, the charges that are filed and sentences received do not differ by race, gender, age, right, religion, or any other factor. Show me the data. Because I can show you 50 more studies showing that there is some differences here. Social services, reported abuse, intake foster care, adoptions and visits. We train Department of Children and Family Services all across the country. Their data shows differences. Their social workers telling me, yeah, we don't treat these kids the same. I go into a house and do a home visit. It's a different experience based upon my background and what I'm perceiving. They'll admit they may have some bias in how this plays out. Okay? So again, but if you have data that shows there's no bias in any of these areas, we would love to see it. Next, education, suspensions, expulsion, discipline. Talk to any principal in any large urban area that has diverse populations, right? Or even suburban areas. See, urban is not necessarily a synonym for black and brown. There is a correlation, but it's not causation. But the notion is any population, any school with a diverse student body, and ask them, are there any gender differences, race, ethnic differences, and suspensions and expulsions? You do know that roughly 20-30% of teachers are responsible for 60 to 70% of suspension and expulsions, because some teachers see the suspension or expulsion as a classroom management strategy. Who's on the receiving end of that strategy? Disproportionately, black and brown boys across the country. For doing the same things. This is apples to apples comparison. Don't say, oh, that's because they act up more. Show me the data. Right? Okay. So, special or gifted recommendations. Do you know how that works in certain schools? That the teacher recommendation can play a role who gets into special education or gifted program. And if I have certain bias towards a certain kid, even if it's implicit, am I recommending that child for the gifted program to the same extent I am other kids? Access to AP classes. That's structural. I'm a college professor. We have students come in applying, you see the transcript from high school. One kid has 3 AP classes, another one has none. Do I conclude the one with the AP classes is smarter than the one who has none? It might just be the case that in high school they offered a minimal number of AP courses. Structural, nothing to do with the kid at all, right? So anyway. Lab equipment. Some kids have cutting edge lab equipment in their high schools, advanced computers and software. You get the point, okay? Also disparities in customer perceptions by demographic. Again, survey your customers. How do they perceive you? They were helpful, they responded to my calls, they respected me, they included me in conversations, that sort of thing. You have data that shows that's consistent amongst the clients. So the quality of service that you provide, is that consistent? Respect from employees, is that consistent? Feeling treated differently because of their race or their age. Do you have the data that shows? So if you feel this DEI stuff is unnecessary, unneeded, show me the data. And then we can have a conversation. Otherwise, let's keep an open mind. Try to be evidence-based and take the emotion out of it. Let's push. What else we got? Now, I'm going to give you some tips, tactics, and strategies when it comes to assessment. This is going to help you for those who are not used to doing this. We do this for partners. I mean, we like doing assessment, but it's a little bit tough. Some of our partners in certain sectors, they just don't want to give us the data. They don't want an objective third party taking a deep dive on their data, because we'll identify the disparities, the potential biases, right? Folks, you got to know where you are to know if something works. It's a pre-post design. Baseline, your strategy, your implementation, and then afterwards. So pre-test, post-test. But the pre has to be there. Oftentimes, folks are scared. They don't want to give us the data, right? Or share the data. You want to hire a contract an expert evaluator researcher. I understand you have talent in your organization. You have somebody in accounting who's good with numbers, and you want them to do your assessment from a social scientific perspective. Maybe they can do it. Folks, I got a PhD, right? I've been teaching research methods and statistics for over 20 years. It ain't intuition. It doesn't just sort of come to you, okay? There's something to this. So get somebody who knows what they're doing. You may have somebody internally, that's wonderful, or you may not. Consider a third party. Focus on key outcomes. Some bias may exist, but it may be irrelevant in the larger scheme of things. Not all differences in the workplace are relevant. So say you find on a survey, in terms of an open-ended question, what do you like most, what do you like least about our workplace? And somebody says, well, we have a bowling league, don't have a softball league. That's bias. Okay. It is a difference, bowling and softball, right? But the notion is, does that affect the day-to-day sort of existence, the ability to reach your mission, even if it's a profit motive? Not so much. Also, as much as possible, disaggregate, separate, right, all key metrics by race, gender, age, and socioeconomic status of those providing and receiving services. This is very important. So the internal, your HR sort of hiring, promotion, employee sort of survey, you want to break that up by as many subgroups as possible without identifying any individual person. So gender, for sure, if your numbers are decent. Race and ethnicity, if you can do that without identifying folks. Sometimes you may have to collapse groups. We don't necessarily like that, but it may be better than just having one overall score. So for example, if you had a predominantly white organization, you can do white, maybe white and non-white, or white, black, Hispanic, Asian, or combine some of those groups depending on your numbers. It just sort of depends. Again, you might not always have socioeconomic data on your employees, right? But when you look at the people you're serving, the public, your customers, your clients, you may have a sense of that. All right, so say, for example, I work for the city and somebody's calling in from a certain neighborhood and they tell me they have a complaint. I know there's a bunch of poor people there. Am I responding the same way as somebody calling from an affluent area who probably knows the mayor or knows my boss? Do you see how that can happen? So that's differential treatment. That's still a biased response, although it's just sort of, one person, one individual perceiving potential consequences of a certain level of service. All right. Then you want to connect disparate outcomes data to the mission or bottom line of the organization. So you find disparities that may exist. You have to get some buy-in. You have to show the stakeholders, look, we have disparities here. Women and men aren't being treated the same. Race, other demographics, religious groups, veteran, non-veteran, married, unmarried, whatever the demographics or whatever the categories may be. If you come across some real differences that can affect people's experiences in the workplace, talk about it. Does that connect to our mission, our bottom line, our culture? Have that conversation and take action as needed. Okay. All right. Some other quick tips. All right, requiring that partner agencies collect race, gender, age, socioeconomic status data in a manner that can easily be analyzed by a third party. Now, this is a pro tip. It's beyond the basics. It's one thing to do this internally, you, your colleagues, in the public you serve. It's another thing to have B2B, business to business, where you have a law firm that supports you, an accounting firm that supports you, a headhunting firm, and you could hold them accountable. You can tell them, well, we want to know that you're engaged in diversity, equity, inclusion in a reasonable way that's consistent with our values. Yes, folks, when you're writing somebody a check, are they going to make money off you? You have leverage. So if you have a choice between 3 law firms and one values diversity, equity, inclusion, they've been engaged in this work, they have a diverse board, diverse partners, and they seem to get it in the same ways that you do, but they can provide the same level of service as 2 other firms, you can go with that firm. It's consistent, all right? That's if you're serious. Some people are serious about this, some people are not. Trend data can reveal important patterns. We love trend data, okay? Folks, you need to know whether you're getting better, getting worse, or remaining the same. One survey is one snapshot, and especially depending on what's going on in society. This is an election year in 2024. Depending on what's going on, that could shift attitudes around. And next year, they can fall back to a baseline. So trend data we really, really like. My advice to you, try to go back, try to always have at least 3 years of data in your charts just to sort of give a sense of how you're going. If you're starting out for the first time or the first year collecting, that's fine. Collect it over time, create some graphs that have trend data. Some data is just going to be difficult to obtain. For example, excessive use of force by police, sexual assault, things like that, where before body cam footage, even with body cam footage, depending on how it works, but many police departments do not have body cameras. And so excessive use of force could be a he said, she said, people are not admitting things, sexual identity, gender identity, just other things that may not always be easy to ascertain via a survey. And just accept it's going to be hard to get this data. Some people just don't want to acknowledge certain things, sexual assault, a variety of levels. So be reasonable in terms of your difficulty with obtaining certain data points. All right, if existing data does not exist, design, assess, and plan for now moving forward. Okay, well, Dr. Marks, we don't have any annual surveys. Start. All right, start collecting this data, start as soon as possible, right? Now, you could also do, we think best practice every 6 months. Good practice, once a year. No practice is bad practice. All right, so if you haven't been doing this, please start. All right. And finally, assessment should take key variables into account during analysis: demographics of the community, voter turnout, business interests. I talked about this a bit already. Things happening in society, things that you just had your CEO turnover. There was a scandal at the job. Your best friends got fired. The whole department got let go. That was disproportionately one group. All sorts of things can happen that are anomalies, that are one-offs, that are special, that can affect the culture of one's psychology, right? That's where trend data comes in. But if you don't have the trend data, just factor in your presentation or write-up of these results the context. If something was going on that may have shifted the data around, be able to be transparent about that possibility, okay? All right, so now it's your turn. We like to do these exercises in our trainings and bias mitigation in particular. We asked our attendees to do something like this, right? So I gave you some science, I gave you some data, I gave you some tips and strategies. I want you to write down, I want you to do this. Write down a concrete strategy for finding disparities in your role in your organization. So think about what you do every day at work and try to identify a moment of discretion, a moment where your subjective experiences or your biases could play a role in the decision that you make or a task that you complete. Right? Just think about that, right? Think about how you could measure that as one person, your unit, department, or overall agency. So what are some opportunities, right, where you can sort of potentially identify disparities that may exist internally or externally? I want you then to write down the first 3 action steps needed to make that strategy happen. Folks, this is going to help you, okay? I'm talking about micro steps, by the way. Email this person, call this person, outline this, micro steps to make that strategy happen. Then I want you to write down up to 3 key people that would have to support the effort, right? Whether you know them or not, by title, director of HR, things like that. Or it could be your boss or your colleagues, okay? Then I want you to write down the most likely obstacle to implementing that practice in at least one potential solution. So it's one thing to complain and say it won't work because of this or that. Think about the most likely obstacle and what's a possible solution. Folks, we have to start thinking in terms of solutions. Complaints are one thing, solutions are another, okay? So it's one thing, we're gonna go through the data, we're gonna identify issues, but we're gonna get to the point where we can identify a solution. This strategy, these points are gonna help you think through some best and best practices. All right, cool. All right, now, as we wrap up, we like our summaries here. So what do we talk about today? All right, so biases toward people, places, things conform on a daily basis. So the red alligator in Florida, that was sort of a bias that conformed just day to day. You're not even knowing when it's going to form. I mean, the Florida thing, I locked you in, the only state, but alligator versus aardvark, alpaca or ants, you thought alligator, the color red versus something else. So you still have biases towards that animal and that color. Next, when people say DEI is dead, ask them to show you the data that objectively shows that there is no racial, gender, age, religious, or relationship bias within their organization or in how they serve the customers of the public. Folks, this is your kryptonite right here, because they're not going to have it. They're just talking. Next, DEI anti-bias training doesn't work, right? When people say that, oh, it doesn't work, people say that, okay. Tell them the training works if you do the work. And give them the personal trainer analogy, right? That usually works, right? Going to a personal trainer, you don't do what they recommend. People usually can get that, whether they've been to a personal trainer or not. And then finally, data can be helpful on several levels. Have a professional collect, analyze, summarize, and present the data if possible. So even if you have to go outside of your in-house talent, do so. If you want to have somebody in-house do it, I would recommend maybe 2 people, not just one, because that one person may have biases in terms of their analysis and their approach and their knowledge of the literature. So 2 people may be a better approach if your capacity allows. And then you want to look at this in an objective manner, get some buy-in, and then take some action. All right, folks, so hopefully this is helpful. Once again, I am Dr. Bryant Marks, professor of psychology at Morehouse College, founder of the National Training Institute on Race and Equity. Our website is www.national.training. Yes, national.training, not .org, not .com, .training. All right, we provide live trainings, both in person and virtual. We have self-paced online video trainings, and we have a retreat on site in Atlanta, a multi-day retreat where you can come down here and I can work with you and your team on developing a multi-year DEI or anti-bias plan, where you leave with deliverables, dates, budgets, personnel responsible, that sort of thing. All right, folks, thank you so much for your time and attention. That is it for me. Until next time, peace and blessings.